Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay there. Um, we might just kick off. So I think we've most people in attendance there now. So good afternoon and welcome to today's session on apartments, MUDs and OMCs. You're all very welcome. My name is Aisling Joyce. I am an architect and I'll be chairing today's meeting. Bit about my own background. I'm currently working as a technical coordinator with a residential developer. So today's topic around OMCs even and MUDs is going to be very relevant to my line of work in particular. And I'm certainly looking forward to hearing David's thoughts and picking his brain with a few questions at the end. So just a quick overview of the course today and to set out the background and aim. The session has been developed to equip architects with an understanding of the evolving landscape of multi-unit developments and owners management companies in Ireland. It will provide insights into current regulatory frameworks, financial considerations, and planning policies that influence apartment developments. The session will highlight key issues architects need to be aware of when supporting clients in the sector. Um, so in terms of an overview and the structure of today's session, it's a 1 hour session. David will be giving us a 45-minute presentation and there will be time for questions and answers at the end. So I'd encourage you all to share your questions in the Q&A chat function, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. I'll be able to take these up during the Q&A segment. They'll all be completely anonymous. And we will also have some polls throughout the session, which Jin Long will be arranging. So polls likewise will be anonymous, but they'll be very helpful in giving us an insight into the range of backgrounds and experience of the participants here today. So do try and participate in those if you can. Just a bit of housekeeping. A copy of today's presentation slides will be distributed by the Education CPD team following the conclusion of today's session. Okay, so now that the general overview is covered, it is my pleasure to welcome David. Hello, David. So
Thank you
David
very much,
is,
Aisling.
good afternoon. Yeah. So David Rouse is a multi-unit development advisor with the housing agency. Um, he engages stakeholders in the sector, including professional bodies, representative organisations, local and national authorities, including approved housing bodies, OMCs, and residents. So David's work supports sustainability, governance, and best practice in the MUD sector. David is a fellow of Chartered Accountants Ireland and is a business and law graduate of UCD. Okay, David, without further ado, I'll leave you off then to share your screen and commence the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Aisling, and thanks indeed to the Institute for the invitation to speak to all of you today. I think we're going, before I launch into my presentation, to run a couple of polls that your colleague Jinlan in the Institute is going to run. So maybe over to you, Jinlan, for a couple of words on those. Thanks.
Thanks, David. I have started the polls, so they're launched now. Participants should be able to see them on their screens. It would be really helpful if everyone could help us answer these questions. It would just give some more information and background to David to then better support the Q&A segment at the end of the presentation. So the polls are running now. The first question in the poll is, what is your level of experience in practice? Followed by, what is your primary area of architectural practice? And the third question is, how familiar are you with MUDs and OMCs? Followed by a question on what particular aspects of MUDs would you find most relevant to your everyday work? And finally, maybe to understand the primary reason for your attendance to today's session. So there is a good level of engagement in the polls at the moment.
Lots of answers coming in, no doubt.
Yeah, we have
So I think
60 odd answers so far. and that's kind of quickly rising. So we might just give it another minute or so, David, if that's okay.
Absolutely, yeah. Some very, very interesting questions from the Institute. Thank you very much indeed. And conscious indeed that this is the week in which an actor playing an architect won an Oscar last Sunday night, Adrian Brody. So in exalted company here to be with the Institute on a session today. So thanks indeed, Jinlan. Do you want to give it another 10 seconds maybe, and then we'll crack on?
We'll do. So we still have some answers coming in. It's leveling off now. Just to thank everyone for answering the questions and giving us some kind of a better picture of where you're all coming from. So I'm just ending it now and sharing the results. So
very good. So lots of experienced people, more than 20 years in practice with the profession, and obviously a large number, a third of people are involved in the residential, a third in single homes, about 20% in MUDs, and then the rest. And I suppose the predominance of people have somewhat familiar, but lots of them not very familiar. So hopefully by the end of the session, we'll have changed that, and the aspects of MUD most relevant to your work, regulatory compliance, featuring very high design and sustainability. And then the last one, primary reason for attending, CPD, and gain insights. So hopefully we'll meet and maybe exceed some of those expectations along the way. Happy enough with that, Shinlan? I'll crack on.
That's great. Thank you, David.
Great stuff. So I'll share my screen and say thanks again to all of you for being here. I hope you have a nice cup of coffee in front of you for what will be a fairly rapid fire run through a lot of different topics. But in saying that, the content is meant to be, a lot of the content is meant to be looked at maybe after the event. You'll have a copy of the slides. So there's some detail that you can maybe refer to later on when you want to have a detailed look at some of the particular topics. And I would also enter the caveat that there is reference to law and regulation, and while the agency is providing information and guidance, material shouldn't really be taken to be strictly legal advice. There are individual cases and circumstances, and the advice of a solicitor or a property professional, or indeed in the context of design, etc., of yourselves is important. So here to support all in the sector without cutting across the existing work. But it will be a rapid fire session. A lot of the slides are visual in nature, and maybe some of them to refer to later. A little bit about ourselves, about the housing agency, for those of you who don't know us. That's the crew there on the left, and our offices just off Merrion Square on 53 Mount Street Upper. We recently issued our statement of strategy for 2025 with our three, I suppose, key visions in relation to being a centre of knowledge for housing and insights, supporting the creation of sustainable and inclusive communities, and addressing housing supply and affordability. The focus of our work: we are focused on people, so renters, owners, and sustainable communities. And you can read more about that in our statement of strategy. I've included a link there for you. As Jinlan and Aisling kindly mentioned earlier on, this is the key agenda, the key issues on the agenda with which you will have been provided when you signed up for the session. So there's interaction between a lot of these themes, a little bit of crossover at times, but we will endeavour to get through it all, and we would be delighted for your questions towards the end. Before I get into the detailed content, a quick word of thanks to you, any of you who were at our outreach sessions around the country in September and October last year. We were in Killarney, we were in Castlebar, Letterkenny, Portlaoise, and so I know lots of members were at that, and lots of members of the public, people involved in OMCs, directors, residents, property management agents, etc. And so we will be hosting those again in September and October this year in different places around the country. Watch our website for that. What is a multi-unit development? Let's just focus on the basics for a moment, considering that there is a spectrum of understanding amongst you out there, and we'll try and get everyone maybe in the same understanding space. This is the, if you like, the dramatis personae, the actors, the different entities and people involved in your typical multi-unit development, which is typically an apartment block with lots of different owners. We'll speak about how it's got more complex in recent times in terms of the ownership profile in a minute, but this is the basics. You have the owner's management company at the center of it all, the OMC in the salmon box, pink box, salmon box there at the center. It is made up of the members, the owners of the properties. They are either typically owner-occupiers or investor landlords. If we were presenting this slide 10, 15 years ago, the investor landlord sector would have been a lot more simple in the sense that today we now have a much more complex profile of investors, if you like, on the institutional, commercial, private side. And equally now we have a very strong representation in the ownership and in the landlord investor sector on the approved housing body side and in terms of local authorities. So a very much more complicated profile of participant, if you like, than would have been the case some years ago. The owners elect the executive board, the board of directors of the OMC, who are typically volunteer directors, residents more often than not in the estate, but some of the investors, landlords can indeed be represented on the board. Perhaps the developer retains a seat on the board, perhaps the local authority or the AHB has a nominee appointed, etc., etc. The directors, as I say, have the executive ultimate responsibility for the affairs of the OMC. They typically, in most cases, but not always, hire a property management agent, a property professional that can operate in the management space and can be providing services to multiple OMCs and multiple estates. And they do the day-to-day work on the ground, the arrangement of the waste management, the insurance, the repairs, the maintenance, the issuing of service charges, and so on and so forth. But it is the owner's management company, the OMC, that typically holds the freehold title to the building, as we see it on the bottom left, and the owners have long leaseholds issued to them by the owner's management company, and they effectively have freehold 999-year leases, and that is the typical structure and the interaction there. As I mentioned, the profile of ownership in the sector and of property ownership more generally has become much more diverse and complex over recent years. This is a table which I have like a magpie taken from a report prepared recently by the Department of Finance in relation to property investment. So you can see the profile of different owners in the sector. So these are effectively in many ways the profile of potentially your client base. Private individuals, companies, corporate entities, be they Irish or non-Irish. We could have partnerships, so professional bodies or professional, not professional bodies, I beg your pardon, professional firms or individuals coming together as partnerships to buy investment properties. There are now trusts, so entities set up with beneficiaries and trustees that would own property. There are entities, as I'm going across the top line there, exempt unit trusts, which are really vehicles for pension investment and fractional ownership in pensions. Of course, we now, as you see in the bottom left, have a large number of insurance companies and pension funds maybe directly investing. In Ireland, in the residential space, we have IRA's REIT, which is the largest private landlord in the country with about 3,500 apartments, give or take, mostly in Dublin now. And then there are other funds, IREFs, Irish real estate funds, which can be IREFs and not IREFs. And a discussion of that is one for our tax and accounting colleagues, perhaps at some other time. And the bottom right then, of course, as we mentioned, the government sector, local authorities, approved housing bodies, and of course our colleagues now in the Land Development Agency. So a much more diverse profile of owners in the sector. Your client base has become a lot more complicated. So people with different perspective, different outlooks, different, obviously, priorities, be it investment returns or residential standards and so on and so forth. So something to have in your minds. The sector has become more complex in the typologies of houses and the typologies of homes, rather, in the sector. So we have, obviously, the PRS sector, which is a significant investor in the sector. We have build to rent, which is no longer, if you like, on the books as a housing typology, but there are some legacy schemes coming through the system. As you know, many of you know, the build to rent apartment typology has in shorthand much larger common areas, much smaller individual homes, and with shared services in those common areas. The schemes that I'm speaking about today are primarily residential, but the types of houses, the types of homes in the estates can be apartments, they can be conventional detached or attached houses, they can be townhouses. So we're speaking about more than simply apartment blocks, but it is apartments that is the typical estate we're talking about. There are, of course, mixed use developments. So there are schemes with homes, but with maybe offices, shops, other retail associated with them. And the types of tenures associated with homes in multi-unit developments has become more complex in recent times. We now have the cost rental model, which is effectively a subsidised rental situation, and we have affordable purchase with the various schemes that the government has introduced over the last number of years as well. So increasing complexity, but hopefully the information we'll provide today will give clarity on some of that. To focus back a little bit on what an OMC is, it is effectively a hybrid type of company. Again, remembering that it's at the centre of the success and the operation of a multi-unit development estate. In some ways, it has the characteristics of a residents association because the volunteer directors, and typically they are volunteers in most cases, are residents on the committee or on the board. It is not for profit in the sense that it takes in service charges and pays out for the services and sets aside money for a sinking fund. So it doesn't, if you like, have a trading profile. But all that said, it is an asset manager. It is a property management business. It is responsible for a building or buildings worth hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions, even hundreds of millions. So a very important entity in the growing profile that is apartments in the country. A report that we published with Clúid Housing, written by Paul Mooney, described the OMC as the glue binding together interests held by owners for their shared services and shared structures. And that's our report available on our website. Brian O'Gorman of Clúid and our chairman Michael Carey in the middle, and the report author Paul Mooney on the right hand side. So that's a scene setting of what a MUD is and what an OMC is. Setting some scene around the size of the sector, the profile of housing in the country. Thanks to our colleagues in the Central Statistics Office, they have established in recent months a housing hub on their website, and you can see the contents on the right-hand side, and I included a link to it there for you. But we're going to illustrate really what you may know intuitively, but here's some hard evidence in the pipeline in terms of planning permissions, commencements and completions. So the planning permission pipeline over the last couple of years up to Q3 of last year, we'll get the Q4 figures on permissions. I think they're out from the CSO Thursday of next month. I hope it's in the diary. But you can see the high proportion of apartments in the planning permission pipeline over recent years. Apartments is the kind of gold part of the bar at the top of each. But also keep in your mind that multi-unit developments, as I mentioned earlier, can include houses, townhouses, duplexes, and so on. So the OMC MUD sector is probably bigger again than just that apartments profile of the permissions. Taking a wider lens, permissions back to 2006, you can see the green line is apartments, which is, as you know, outpaced houses as a typology in the permissions pipeline over recent years. Okay, that's permissions. What about commencements? The bar in the middle, so the sort of moderately light blue is apartments. The bright green is scheme houses, and one-off houses is the dark blue at the bottom. And you can see consistently that apartments form a very, very large proportion of commencements in terms of dwelling types. What about, so that's fine, that's permissions, completion, commencements. What about completions? And here we see the yellow or gold line again is as apartments, and you can see a big spike in 2023, potentially driven by some of the various waivers and in development costs and so on in recent years. But the point here is to emphasize the increasing proportion and the rate of increase of apartments as part of the housing stock over the years. So last year, 29% of national completions were apartments, 60% of Dublin completions, so the 4 Dublin local authority areas were apartments, and 75% of all apartment completions in the country were in Dublin. So I've included the links to the CSO there, and with a nod to the Sunday Business Post from a couple of weeks ago, this is a profile of apartment completions in the big towns and the cities, and you can see, focusing in again on that criterion, that Dublin dominates in terms of apartment completions in towns and cities as opposed to nationally. So useful information there as well. Who's buying the apartments that are completed? This graph is from a Department of Finance report into fund investments. And in simple terms, the gold at the top of each bar is the investment by, is the purchases by local authorities and approved housing bodies. The bright green in the middle is single one-off purchases. So private, if you like, owner-occupier or private investor, individual persons purchasing, which you can see from 2017 to 2023 hasn't really moved a great deal, as highlighted in the red circles. And then the PRS, so the private institutional commercial funds, have been a significant purchaser of apartment completions. You know a lot of this intuitively. A lot of this is known to you from your client interactions, but here's the hard data from the Department of Finance. In terms of putting some colour on last year's acquisitions, the top 10 housing deals in 2024, all of which were in Dublin, you can see that 7 of them were by either approved housing bodies or our colleagues in the Land Development Agency. Looking at Census 2022, and the run rate of apartments as part of the housing profile, you can see some of the statistics there. We know that household sizes are getting smaller and the types of households in Ireland are changing from the traditional, conventional, if you like, large family or smaller family into one person or 1 or 2 person homes as well. And we can see that from 2022, and when our census comes through again in a number of years, that'll be borne out as well. In terms of the actual profile of the housing stock, the occupied dwellings, the figures on the right-hand side, you can see the flat or apartments in purpose-built blocks or flatter apartments in commercial housing as well. So you can see at the bottom right-hand side the increasing component of apartments and flats as a part of the housing stock. We've mentioned new dwelling size, obviously. More and more apartments indicates smaller new dwelling sizes. In terms of the profile of private tenancies, it would be a surprise maybe to some, maybe not to others, that more than half of private tenancies registered with the Residential Tenancies Board in Q3 of last year, more than half of them were apartments. So 124,000 in the first ring, the first circle at the bottom were apartments, and about 119,000 were conventional houses. And in the AHB stock, slightly different profile, where houses dominate, but not by much. About 25,000 were houses in the AHB dwelling types, and about 23,000 were apartments. As I mentioned, Irish REIT is the largest holder of, is the largest private landlord in the country. In 2023, Irish REIT was involved in estates, in multi-unit developments, 33 in the country that had an owner's management company, and they paid almost 10 million in fees to OMCs. So the point here, I guess, and I might just stop sharing to give you a little bit of a break from the PowerPoint, is that apartments are becoming an increasing component of our national housing stock. They are increasingly important, and their health and the health of OMCs is increasingly important, both to the large private landlords and private owners, and equally to the public and social housing stock in the country. And just to bear that out, this is the numbers from 2023, in which the 6 largest AHBs held stock in estates with an owner's management company. So really, really significant for their work over time. And I've included some extracts from some of their annual reports you might want to look at there, and a link to the approved housing body regulatory authority, which now regulates about 400 approved housing bodies covering about 60,000 units nationally. So that's the kind of the pipeline, the commencements, completions. Who are the big players? What are the recent big deals? What else? Recent big deals in terms of purchases and construction. What else is coming through in national planning policy? We are soon to see the update to the National Planning Framework and the housing targets, so due out in the next period. Some of you will know that early last year, the Sustainable Residential and Compact Settlement Guidelines were issued for local authorities as well, with a slight maybe focus on own door homes as well, but with an emphasis on apartments. A little ad for some of the work that our colleagues in our policy and practice, excuse me, section have undertaken, looking at sustainable compact development internationally. And I'd invite you to maybe have a look at that case study analysis. Lots of interesting insights from Austria, Denmark, USA, Germany, a lot of them around brownfield development, so worth a look as well. That's the pipeline. That's some policy context. What's actually happening on the ground in MUDs and OMCs? Lots of you will know from the Irish Times Property Clinic and the newspapers and everything else, the issues around service charges, sinking fund, challenges around shared amenities and so on, parking, all those types of issues. And maybe these are considerations maybe to bear in mind in the design of new schemes, etc., but worth kind of thinking on. The OMC sector was described last year as the Wild West of regulation, and we'll talk about supports and resources available to come away from that particular perspective. We all know the challenges of the defect situation in the country as well, and the challenges indeed around the financing of build to sell apartments. And the Department of Finance issued a report on this last year, which I suppose speaks to the one of the schemes that the Housing Agency is responsible for administering, which is the Croí Cónaithe Cities scheme. And I've included the link to that on our website, where you can see the latest, the approved developments in that scheme, how the funding works. There's frequently asked questions, lots of resources there, and my colleagues in the Croí Cónaithe section would be delighted to assist you with any questions you have on that. So that's some policy context, some of the schemes that are out there. Let's just do some quick touches on some of the most important legislation in this space. So we promised you some insights on law and regulation. I couldn't possibly devote all the time I'd like to on all of these topics, but I'll show you where we have done that online later on. A quick one, diving straight into it on the Multi-Unit Developments, on the Multi-Unit Development Act 2011, which is the main piece of legislation we have at the moment. So I suppose some of these slides, some of this content is designed to be provocative, thought-provoking. There are inconvenient truths perhaps in these slides. Are OMCs and estates setting the right budgets for their estates? Are they going out and tendering for their services, for their waste management, their insurance, their repairs, etc., etc.? What about energy costs? We have some resources about how you can tackle energy costs in the estate you're involved in. If we were doing this presentation 7 or 8 years ago, energy costs probably wouldn't have featured. Insurance also features as well, so we'll touch on that. Here is a deliberately provocative slide. This is a budget, a draft budget for an apartment block of 142 units. And magically, the budget for the scheme is €142,000, which tells me someone decided to charge €1,000 per unit per annum in a service charge and see how they got on. But within that budget is a line item for 2.1 for block insurance of €9,000, which to my mind lacks an amount of rigour. If you can insure an apartment block of 142,000 units for €9,000, well, that's extraordinary when you think of what it takes you to, what it costs to insure your car even, for example. So I think there's question marks around that particular budget. So the impetus or the thrust of what I'm saying here is, are the budgets realistic? Is there a reality check around service charges? What about sinking funds? All the apartments that we're building, the individual components of them have limited life cycles. The lifts might last 15, 20 years. The external facades might last 50, 60 years. The carpets might last 15 years. The fire safety equipment has to be replaced as well. All of this runs out of its useful working life. We have to replace it. We have to fund it. The MUD Act says that OMCs should set aside €200 per unit per annum, or such other amount as may be agreed by the owners, management company members in their annual general meeting when they get together to set their budget. So keep that thought in your mind when you look at this example of a block of apartments of 40 units. And these are the typical components. I don't need to go through them all, but a rough back of the envelope calculation, which would not have the rigour of a sinking fund or a building investment fund calculation, indicates that that block requires a sinking fund of about 585, 600,000 euro to be accumulated. Run that over 40 units over, say, 25 years. As I say, some parts of the building will last 100 years, some will last 15 years. But roughly, that's €600 per unit per annum. Contrast that with what the MUD Act says, €200 per unit per annum, or such other amount as may be agreed, which, unfortunately, is frequently zero. Don't take my word for it. The Society of Chartered Surveyors, our colleagues in the SCSI, commissioned a report on this in 2018, and they looked at it in 2024, and you can look at that perhaps in your own time. But as the media commentary illustrates on the right-hand side, there are challenges, and apartments appear not to be setting aside enough for the long-term replacement of the building, and I've included some additional reading for you there. So these are inconvenient, uncomfortable truths that must be addressed by OMCs and multi-unit developments. Are their service charges adequate? Are the sinking funds adequate? What about defects? What about other future costs like insurance and energy costs? The Fire Safety Task Force report, with which some of you will be familiar, issued a report in 2018 post-Grenfell looking at the cladding situation in Ireland, and they had as one of their recommendations that the efficient and timely recovery of service charges in apartment blocks needs to be facilitated to fund the maintenance, enhancement and replacement of fire protection facilities, and I might add all the rest of the components of the building. This was looked at in the report from 2019 that I mentioned earlier, and some of the recommendations in that report speak to it. The programme for government in 2020 looked at the management company reform of the legislation, as did Housing for All, and there were some actions for government in and around that. And the Housing Commission also made recommendations that this matter be addressed, that it be made easier for OMCs and apartment developments to collect their service charges, and some mandation around sinking fund provision. The latest programme for government, which was published in January, has commitments to move responsibility for the MUD Act from the Department of Justice to the Department of Housing, where it currently sits, to streamline support for OMCs. And there is a commitment to establish a unit in the Housing Agency to regulate OMCs to address some of these matters. So we await developments from those in the relevant positions as to progress on that. There is also, just as an aside, a proposal to move the regulation of property management agents and estate agents from the Department of Justice to Housing as well. There is a conveyancing reform review group underway between the Departments of Justice and Housing, which was latest look last June, which is looking at some legal reform on conveyancing from apartments as well. What I've included in the slides for you to look at in your own time, if you want to look at them or not, are the other commitments in the programme for government in relation to housing. So they're included in the slides, and you can look at those later on. If you want to, so we've looked at the MUD Act, we've looked at service charges and sinking fund and some of the proposals for law reform around that. What if you want to find out what's going on in a multi-unit development right now? So if you're looking to acquire, if you're involved in some way in an existing scheme and you want to understand what's going on, if you're an owner in an estate, if you're an investor in an estate, if your clients are involved in that respect, you need to look at the report that is issued under Section 17 of the Multi-Unit Developments Act. It is a specific annual report that must be prepared by the OMC. It must be sent out to its members 10 days before the annual general meeting. It is a document that is different to, but has similar components to, the statutory accounts that the OMC would file with the CRO. I've included the content there that must be included in that report, and I've highlighted some of the components. In particular, you must have a statement about the insured value of the property. You must have information about the fire safety equipment. You must have information about, where money is going to be spent, how the sinking fund is funded, what the service charges are, etc., etc. I'm highlighting insurance there because the Housing Agency has produced the first ever tailored guide to insurance for MUDs produced in Ireland. It's there on our website. You can see the content, and I'd invite you to look at that maybe in your own time, hopefully helpful to those in the sector dealing with insurance. A little sideway in the context of the MUD Act and finances and conveyancing, worth highlighting the roles of other professionals in the sector, specifically our colleagues in the legal sector and in the property management sector. And again, to say we're here to provide help and assistance to all the citizens dealing in this space, and hopefully we do that without cutting across the role that advisors provide. But also worth pointing out that the important time, and if you're to take away anything from this little couple of slides, there is a time and a place to ask questions about what's going on in a multi-unit development in the context of buying and selling and conveyancing. That is in the form of the requisitions, which is I suppose a technical term for a questionnaire that purchaser solicitor will send to a vendor solicitor and ask them what's going on in the estate, send me the accounts, are there any claims against the OMC, how's the sinking fund, are there defects, etc., etc. So that is an extremely important role of the legal profession in the conveyancing of any properties, but in particular, obviously, in the context of OMCs, which are more complicated, in MUDs, which have that extra layer of, if you like, governance in the ownership of the property. This is the time to ask the hard questions when the due diligence is being undertaken on the purchase. Ask the hard questions then. So that's the role of the solicitor. Property management agents, as I mentioned, this is where they sit in the red circle at the bottom. They're doing the day-to-day management of the estate. They are regulated by the Property Services Regulatory Authority. The PSRA, as I say, looks after management agents. It doesn't regulate OMCs or residential tenancies. There are other routes around that. The agents have to act to minimum standards. The PSRA has developed a code of practice, and there is happily a plain English guide to the standards to which agents must act. And I've included a link to it there on the cover page as well. The letter of engagement, so the contract between the agent and the OMC, is a vital document that sets out the fees that the agent may charge, the service levels that they must provide, dispute resolution, all that good stuff. And it's been highlighted by the PSRA, the importance of that particular contract. Again, the Housing Agency has published the first ever tailored guide for MUDs and OMCs, how to go about hiring or firing a property management agent, and you can see the matters considered in that, and I've included a link for you there as well, and a little bit of writing from IPAV's Property Professional on effectively the life of a property management agent might be of interest to you as well. And we hosted a webinar last year, so date for your diary, next year. No, this year, 2025, 20th of May, 2025, we are hosting a webinar with the Property Services Regulatory Authority. What you see pictured is last year, so Maeve Hogan, the regulator, is on the bottom right-hand side. Our session will be on the 20th of May. This year, we'll be looking at the letter of engagement. Watch our website, watch the PSR's website for details of how to register for that. So that's the MUD Act, Property Services Regulation, etc. A little bit about company law. OMCs are bodies corporate. They must comply with the Companies Act. Again, we could spend a lot of time on this. I'm going to highlight really directors' duties. So individuals serving as directors of owners management companies, like any other company, must act in good faith. They must come with, if you like, clean hands to the operation of the governance of the OMC. They must act in the best interests of everyone in the estate. They must avoid conflicts of interest. I've included all the directors' duties there as well. But if you want some pithy guidance on this, my own professional body were good enough to collaborate on a concise guide for directors of OMCs. I think it runs to about 25, 30 pages, but that's as concise as we could make it, covering those particular topics on governance, directors' duties, finances, cash and debtors, outsourcing, AGMs, dispute resolution, lots of signposts there for you in that. A quick pit stop, virtual AGMs for OMCs are facilitated under the Companies Act 2024 with the rider that all members must have a reasonable opportunity to participate in the meeting. So we hear stories of people having problems voting, people having problems logging in. There's detailed guidance in the legislation around all of that. I'm about to ask you to do something for me, but before I do that, I'm going to tell you how many OMCs are in the country, roughly. This is the run rate of new OMCs since the MUD Act came in 2011. So as you can see, 2024 was a record year of 235 new OMCs. We reckon there's about 8, 9, 10,000 OMCs in the country, give or take. You can read the methodology behind those numbers in your own time. What I'm asking you to do, please, is if you are a director of an OMC, if you're in any way related to or responsible for the filing of the annual return for the company with the Companies Office, and this is the Companies Office filing platform, there is a box to tick. I've highlighted in red where OMCs can identify themselves as such. I won't bore you with the detail behind why and how they can't be identified at the moment. If people involved in the sector would kindly tick that box, it would help us a lot in terms of the regulation space coming down the road. We need to know who the OMCs are and where they are. There's guidance on the CRO website around that, and I've included an article that Surveyor's Journal kindly included on that topic. I'm going to talk about the register of members. So we're still under the heading of company law here, right? Company law, the register of members is effectively the electoral register for a company. So it is the members of the company. Who are the members in the company? And in the context of an owner's management company, that will broadly equal who are the owners of the properties in the company, because every member of the OMC is, by dint of that membership, an owner in the estate, and vice versa. The register of members is a public document. So as I say, the electoral register for the estate, it is there to allow individual members contact each other. It contains the name, the correspondence address, the date of joining, and the date of leaving the company if someone is no longer an owner. It contains not email addresses or telephone numbers. It is names, correspondence addresses. But it is a vital piece of information to allow members, owners in estates to contact each other. It is a public document. The Corporate Enforcement Authority, which is effectively the enforcement body for company law in the country, as you can see on screen, has issued guidance to say that it is a public document. Data protection, GDPR, is not a reason for restricting access to it. I've included some of the other guidance there from the Corporate Enforcement Authority in terms of what it'll get involved in company law and OMCs and dispute resolution. And I've included some guidance on directors' duties and their enforcement processes as well. The data protection issue is also covered in tailored guidance produced by the Data Protection Commission in relation to MUDs and OMCs. You can look at it there in your own time, and some case studies as well. I suppose the two main case studies I'd highlight are: one, the register of members. Again, they explain that it's a public document available to all. There is also the issue of so-called, quote, naming and shaming of people who have not paid their annual management fees to the OMC. And the data protection guidance on that is that it is not permissible to produce lists of debtors and circulate them. There are other methods of debt collection available to people. So that's the MUD Act, Property Services Regulation, company law, a little bit of data protection. A pit stop here with a checklist of the main important documents for OMCs. You have the constitution of the OMC, which in old money or before the Companies Act 2014 was called the Memorandum and Articles of Association. We've already dealt with the contract with the agent, the letter of engagement. I've spoken about the head lease, which sets out the covenants, the rights and obligations between the OMC and the property owners. So who owns the balcony? That will be determined in the demise covenants of the head lease. Who has the obligation to insure such and such property? That's in the head lease. House rules are basically a plain English guide to conduct in the estate, and I'll show you where you can get some information on that. Does the OMC have a debt collection policy? So when it issues its service charge invoice, when does it send its first reminder? When does it send its second reminder? When does it charge interest? When does it go legal to collect its service charge fees? That should be set out in a debt collection policy. A risk register may be overkill for some OMCs, but maybe, directors of big schemes might think about them. Title documents. So if you're trying to find out who owns what in an estate, look at the development agreement, look at the management company agreement. Has there been a deed of transfer of the common areas? All MUDs since 2011 should have transferred the common areas before they sell the units. Older MUDs should have done it by 2011. Is there a taking in charge agreement? In other words, is there a part of the estate that for whatever reason is going to be taken in charge by Irish Water or the local authority? Our colleagues in the Office of Planning Regulator have kindly produced a guide on that. It's available from their website, with the health warning that the guide was written before the 2024 Planning and Development Act was produced. So, health warning on that. And as I mentioned, the Planning and Development Act on the Department of Housing's website the day before yesterday, updates on the commencement of all of that. So you can read that perhaps in your own time as well. A jump to, so we've dealt with MUD Act, company law, service management agents, a little bit on regulation on that side. What about planning law? Otherwise, of course, you'll all be familiar with the planning guidelines for local authorities. I just draw your attention to, and this is not a construction technical session, quite obviously, you're the experts in that space. This is law, regulation, finances, etc. But I would draw attention to Chapter 6 of those design standards, which focus on all the issues we've been talking about up to now, the long-term sustainability of the estate. And the message here is that all planning applications for apartment developments must include a building life cycle report. It must have commentary around the MUD Act, the OMC, the sinking fund. I've seen some of these building life cycle reports through the planning system. Many of them have this sort of general exclusion to say, we don't have the costs. We can't determine the long-term cost of it. I suppose question mark around that. If the building has been funded by finance, by lending, by credit, etc., someone has done some costings. So perhaps there's more available in those life cycle reports. What else is available from ourselves on some of this? A good document produced by our colleagues in policy and practice on converting offices, one in Cork, one in Dublin, done by TUA, converting offices to apartments. Very worthwhile read. Insights, learnings, etc. Worth a read on that. So we've spoken about, mentioned finances, I mentioned energy saving, energy costs, what's available for apartment schemes right now. The Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland are the touch point at the information source and indeed the finance source for funding for apartments, be it retrofitting, be it insulation and so on. If schemes want to do large retrofitting, large insulation projects, it's through the Community Energy Grant Scheme from the SEAI. I've included a link to that, and we Housing Agency hosted a webinar with colleagues from TUA and Irish REIT last year, the year before, with some ideas around that, and you can have a look at it. Currently, individuals in conventional 3-bedroom semi-Ds or bungalows or detached houses or whatever can apply for soft loans, 60, 70, 80,000 euro at reduced interest rates from the banks to do their retrofitting. If you happen to live in a building that happens to be an apartment block where the roof is and the external walls are owned by hundreds of people, you won't get a loan for that from the banks for that retrofitting, or at least I haven't seen it. If you have, let me know. We have some research on that supported by our colleagues in the EU to advance the retrofitting of multi-apartment buildings. So we'll see that coming out in the pipeline over time. We also have some research coming through with our colleagues in the Construction Bar Association on decisions of the courts under the MUD Act as well. So that'll inform some of the background work. So I've included information around that for you as well. What about design? What about district heating? This is going to become something much bigger in the profile of the stock down the years. Most of you know what district heating is, but if we take the example on the right-hand side of the Poolbeg plant, hot water out from the Poolbeg plant, pipe it into the offices and buildings in Dublin city centre and pipe back the cold water to cool down the facility again. And there is a pilot or a leader scheme in Tala. The Amazon data centre now heats Tala University, TUD, Technological University in Tala. It heats the South Dublin County Council offices. I think it heats part of the hospital, and I think it's going to heat an apartment block soon enough as well. So there is legislation coming out on that, and you can look at that in your own time. If apartment blocks put solar panels on the rooftop, and let's say in a few years they want to pipe power, they want to wire power down into the individual blocks, are those electric systems regulated? Are they fit for purpose? Are they safe? There is legislation coming around called private wires, and there's consultation around that. Maybe this is something to consider in the design space. Food for thought for you, perhaps. Something you probably saw on the news yesterday was a situation in West Dublin around owners being asked to remove EV charging points, and I suppose this is relevant to existing schemes, retrofitting these power and energy sources. Obviously, new schemes, the building regulations require them to have them already, but in existing schemes, this is a challenge. The SEAI has an apartment charger grant. There are some maximum thresholds and costs involved, but have a look on their website. We have an EU commissioner now on energy and housing, so let's see what comes from his directorate in terms of policy change on that front. I've included some slides for you from our colleagues in the Waste Environment Regional Lead Authorities around the changes to regulations of waste management in multi-unit developments and apartment blocks. It deals with waste collectors' responsibility, householders' responsibility, segregation practices, and so on. You can contact them. You can read those slides in your own time. But I suppose the question is, maybe for designers, are the spaces where we're storing our waste, are they big enough? Are they ventilated? Are they pleasant places in which to deposit your rubbish? Are they secure? All the rest of it. Worth a look later on, maybe in your own time. Coming close to the end, the defect situation, I've included links to our website and the information around the two pillars that are, I suppose, currently live. The interim remediation scheme for fire safety defects is open and material on our website there. You can look at some of the numbers, maybe the recent numbers in your own time. The preponderance of the homes affected are in Dublin, as you can see, and in the larger Dublin area. And you can look at our website and the website of the Department of Housing. The remediation bill, the heads of bill have been agreed. We're expecting legislation in the coming period to deal with construction defects in terms of the structural aspects, the water ingress. So watch this space for that. There have been a number of Pathfinder projects to iron out some of the speed bumps in the process, and there is a slight delay to some of the work on the interim scheme due to some procurement issues, and I've included the detail on that and the programme for government commitments in the space. Contact my colleagues in the interim remediation section for more information on that. I've included the fire safety guidance chapter or section 7 of that comments on fire safety for owners, management companies and MUDs, and there is also a relationship there with the residential rental standards as well. We promised you something on the international perspective. What's going on in the rest of the world in this space? We keep in touch through various conferences and engagements with colleagues in English-speaking and non-English-speaking countries. I suppose the message from the material, which you can look at maybe in your own time, is that a lot of the challenges are the same. So in the US, the Community Associations Institute, which is kind of a federation of condo or OMCs over there, have looked at these issues. Clearly, the Surfside disaster, Champlain Towers in Florida in 2021, initiated a lot of this analysis and, I suppose, issues around sinking funds, service charges, serving on boards, recruiting people to get involved, putting in place finance. You know, we're divided by an ocean and maybe more things than we used to be divided by, but the commonalities are there in terms of what's going on in the US. In Canada, we keep an eye on the regulation of apartments and MUDs there and see what we can learn from them. Other resources available to you. Our website has lots of hopefully rich data. I mentioned house rules earlier on, rich information. There is a sample set of house rules. You can download a Word document and adapt for your own scheme. We have on YouTube multiple sessions, hour-long deep dives with expert solicitors, accountants, quantity surveyors on the topics you see on screen. When you're done with all those, we have more general sessions. I mentioned some of them earlier. The Institute was good enough to collaborate with us a couple of years back with the great John O'Mahony on a session on the planning guidelines. So obviously a caveat that recording was back a couple of years ago and times have moved on, but to acknowledge the involvement of the Institute. I mentioned we'll be having our outreach events in September and October. Watch our website for that. We've had nearly 30 of them around the country to date, so please do attend if you see them. There are publications, weighty tomes out there for further reading in this space that will be valuable to you. We have written extensively in the various trade and professional journals. And again, thanks to the Institute for their publication of a piece I did myself on some of the issues around the balance between cost and design. I'd invite you to look at the guidance that's available from the Office of the Planning Regulator on the LRD planning process, planning enforcement, and their lessons from litigation in the LRD space as well. Some links to podcasts that might be of interest. Some of you might want to chuck one of these on your phone when you're having it out for a walk or whatever else. There's one I did with the Property Pod that might send you to sleep if you're stuck for a sleeping pill. If you want to be added to our newsletter, please let us know. I suppose to wrap up and conclude, this is a novel space for Ireland in terms of the profile of housing. It's complex, it's becoming more complex, it's evolving. There are lots of resources out there. Please take independent advice around property or legal issues, but otherwise contact mud@housingagency.ie. That will get me and the team here. If we can be of help, please get in touch. So that leaves us slightly me running over time with about 5 minutes to do Q&A. So I think I hand back to Aisling now. So thanks very much, Aisling.
Hi, David. Thanks a million. That was really informative and very in-depth. So I'll definitely be needing those notes after this presentation to get to rejig my memory on some of those points you touched on. I particularly enjoyed your description of the OMCs as being the Wild West of regulation. So
There you go.
sure
Yeah.
many
Well,
of us got a kick out of that.
we'll give the credit to that for the Irish Times. Yeah.
Good stuff. David, I have a good few questions, conscious of time, but look, we'll fly through them and answer them the best you can. The first one is, when will the Programme for Government Commitments for OMC regulation be implemented?
Good question. I guess that's a question for those with a different pay grade to mine. So we'll watch our political masters and our departmental colleagues, and we'll try and keep people informed as best we can on that one.
Excellent. Okay, good stuff. Then where can I find out more about the district heating legislation?
The Department of the Environment, Communications and Climate are the best website for that. So they've loads of material on district heating. The SEAI have a number of research projects as well. I looked at the research call for last year and this year, and it features there as well. So pretty good stuff from them. And Codema, of course, as well, are leaders in Dublin on so CODEMA, Codema are the Dublin leads there. So
Codema.
they've loads on district heating. Yep.
Excellent. Thanks, David. Um, Next question then. Does an OMC director have to be an owner in the development?
The short answer is no. Sometimes the constitution of the OMC will require it, however. So the best way to determine that in an estate is to check the constitution. And if there's no reference to a requirement that the directors be owners, then anyone can be a director of the OMC, provided they're not otherwise disbarred from being a director for all the reasons in the Companies Act.
Okay, excellent. One of the questions that came in much earlier in your presentation was in relation to the rules for houses or for below 5 number dwellings in a development.
Yeah, this is getting into the space where legal advice is best
Mm,
required, but there are provisions of the MUD Act that apply to smaller schemes, and there is a kind of a technical interpretation. But if that questioner, I think it might be John, if he wants to email in, and more than anyone, we won't get to all the questions now. They can email to mud@housingagency.ie, and we'll point them in the. We may not give them the precise answer, but we'll certainly point them in the direction of where they can get the precise answer.
excellent. Many thanks. When is build to rent finishing? You referred to it during your presentation, and did you perhaps mean co-living?
I didn't, and I think build to rent was there was if you excuse the pun, there was a window when it was available as a housing typology, but I think it was July 2023. But don't hold me to that. I think that's when the update was done to the planning guidelines. But I can clarify that for Michelle after the chat.
Excellent, thank you. And then a question that came up that I'm often confused by myself. Do the names apartment and flat mean the same thing?
A rose by any other name would smell as sweet. I mean, flat was the term, and then apartments came in.
Yeah,
I mean, they're not. I don't believe that they're statutorily defined. It may be that they are in certain residential tenancies legislation, but in my mind, they're broadly the same thing.
yeah. Okay, excellent. Um, are OMCs exclusive to apartment type developments? Now, this is one that I'm coming across in my own line of work, so I can have a bit of a stab at the answer here, but no, I'll leave it to you, David. Or can they also be used for multi-house and duplex developments?
They are used for multi-house or duplex developments. So it will depend on the planning conditions. It will depend on the configuration of the different owners. So if you have cost rental, if you have affordable housing, if you have private ownership, if you have AHB ownership, etc., how do you manage the shared spaces?
Mm.
How do you manage the shared services? And the OMC typically is the preferred mechanism to do that as the owner of the freehold and taking in the costs and dispersing the costs out. So, they are not exclusive to apartments, no.
Yes, absolutely. It's a challenge that we're having ourselves is how to allocate the OMC versus the taken in charge areas, and the challenges that come with that in terms of public lighting and ducting
Absolutely.
within. You referred at one point to the OMC guidance documents. But one challenge we're having is that where we have ducting laid in footpaths for future-proofing EV charging, and where typically that footpath would be offered to the relevant council to be taken in charge, the kind of the grey area then becomes about that OMC or about that ducting strip. Does that is
Who
that
owns it?
offered up to
Yeah.
OMC. So we're sort of in flux ourselves in our work in terms of a direction on that. But I think it's something that'll be ironed out. And you kind of
I
alluded
think
to it in
so.
your
Yeah.
presentation as well in terms of the planning guidelines and how they're feeding into this as well. So I think these things will just get ironed out in time.
And as people become more familiar with the housing typologies as well. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, I think we're nearly there. Just looking the last two questions for you there now. Um, sorry, the last question. Are one-off levies a legal addition to a management fee to look after, repair, and maintain common areas within a development?
So in short, you have your annual service charges for the day-to-day operation of the estate. You have your sinking fund contribution for the long-term capital, the lifts, the roofs, the pumps, all the rest of it. And then so-called levies might be over and above for perhaps defect remediation and etc. That's the typical, if you want to split up the financials into kind of three components. Hopefully you're providing for number one, you're setting aside for number two, and unfortunately many are challenged with the third component, the defects levy, and there is a scheme to address that.
Excellent. Well, that timing couldn't have been better, David.
Excellent, great stuff.
So just on the mark of 3 p.m., we might just wrap up there and just a few closing remarks to say thank you very much, David, for a very detailed presentation and really super answers to those questions that were coming through. It's great to see such level of engagement in a really complex topic. So thank you to all the participants for joining us today for the session. A copy of the presentation, the slides will be distributed by the Education CPD team following the conclusion of today's session. I think we're happy enough to wrap up there. I don't know, Jinlong, did you have any other polls or?
No, that's it.
All
Thank
good.
you,
Excellent.
Aisling.
Well,
Thanks a million.
thank you very much. We leave it there so.
Claude, Kermagov.
Slán, David.
Thanks, everyone.